Also, make sure your mics are on when you're going to speak. It's a little clumsy. So you need to push down. Here, I'll show you. Push down. Good thing I'm also not in charge of tech support. That was about as complicated a task as I can handle. So I'm delighted to introduce our panel, first morning panel on the topic of cultivating sustainable global futures for education. Our moderator for the session will be Iveta Silova, who is an associate dean for global engagement in Mary Lou Fulton College, and I'll let her introduce the rest of the panelists. One thing I do want to let you know, you will see at the end of their conversation a slide that will have some information about how you can post. It'll have a QR code and instructions for how you can post questions to Slido. We're going to be gathering questions throughout the conference for our closing keynote speaker, Ron Beghetto. Ron is a faculty member in Mary Lou Fulton College, and he's been doing a lot of experimental work with AI bots. And he's going to be using some of your questions, feeding them into his bots, and using that as a basis for his closing keynote session tomorrow. So I encourage you to post questions, and of course, encourage you to stay throughout the conference through lunch tomorrow so you can see what happens with a really concrete application of AI. So with that, Iveta, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Betty, and thank you to our amazing panelists and all of our guests. I'm incredibly honored to facilitate this conversation today. And I will start with very brief introductions of our speakers. And when I was thinking about how to introduce them, I thought it would be probably to me at least, it was most interesting to think about a question when I think about their name. So for Wolfgang Lutz, imagine if you could predict the future, not just populations, but of education, planetary sustainability, and global futures. That's exactly what Wolfgang Lutz has dedicated his career to doing. As one of the world's foremost demographers, he has transformed how we understand the power of education by integrating it into population forecasting, proving its role in shaping health, economic stability, and climate resilience. His work transformed the shared socioeconomic pathways as a vital framework for global climate policy by proving that investing in education is essential for sustainable planetary futures. As a leader at the Vienna Institute for Demography and the Wittgenstein Center, Wolfgang has influenced international policy and scientific discourse with over 300 publications in top journals like Science and Nature. Now, Kwame Akyeampong. How do we move from policy talk to real change in global education? Kwame has spent over 30 years tackling this challenge, reshaping teacher training, driving education reform, and leading large-scale impact studies across Africa and beyond. From Ghana to UNESCO to the Open University, Kwame has been at the forefront of research-driven change. In 2020, he founded the Open University's Interdisciplinary Center for the Study of Global Development. As a board member of Luminous Fund and also board member of Teaching at the Right Level Africa, he continues to push for equitable, evidence-based education policy and practice. And Rukmini, Banerji, what is the point of school if children aren't learning? This is really core question. And for Rukmini, it isn't just a question, it's a lifelong mission. As a CEO of Pratham Education Foundation, she has led a revolution in how children learn, ensuring that education isn't just about attendance, as often measured by SDGs, but actual progress and actual meaningful learning. So Pratham's program, Teaching at the Right Level, is a simple yet very radical idea. Group children by what they know, not by their age or grade. This approach has transformed classrooms across India, South Asia, and Africa, proving that a tailored approach can bridge learning gaps much faster. But real change starts with understanding the problem. So in 2015, Rukmini helped launch an annual Status of Education report, revealing that millions of children in school couldn't read or do basic math. This was a wake-up call which sparked action in more than 15 countries, pushing policymakers to rethink education. For her game-changing work, she's earned national recognition and international recognition, but her true legacy is in the millions of children who are now finally learning in meaningful ways. So what you maybe already have sensed, that across these amazing panelists, one lines through is that they all really deeply care for universal education, not elitist education for some, but education that can reach in meaningful way all of the children across times and contexts. And for the discussion today, we organized our conversation around two broader themes, and we will start with the first one about the global trends and knowledge, local knowledge in a changing world, and especially in this very volatile and uncertain context today. And I will start with this theme about how can education system evolve to meet the urgent global challenges, from demographic shifts to inequality to planetary sustainability. How can community-rooted, inclusive, and contextual grounded approaches inform and transform global education agendas? And our second conversation will go more deeply into some of the planetary sustainability challenges. But we'll start with the first one. And I will ask my first question to Wolfgang. Your research shows how education levels today shape demographic and economic futures. So looking at current trends, what do demographic projections tell us about the most urgent learning needs for the next 50 years? We would be really grateful if you can help us set the stage and the vision.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm also happy to be here back in Phoenix exactly 20 years after my last visit, when I was speaking at the occasion of an inaugural conference of a group called the Phoenix Philosophical Society. And there was a gala dinner where everybody had a sort of a hand-painted plate with two nice quotes by Benjamin Franklin. And I remember them well because they are still sitting on above my desk. And the first is a very short sentence saying, if a man empties his purse into his head, nobody can take it away from him. And that is, of course, very much the individual level rationale for education. We can discuss after the lecture we just heard whether this is still the case in the time of artificial intelligence. But it's complemented by a second very short quote that is then bringing this up to the level of society. And there Benjamin Franklin said, an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. And so this brings me to what I do as a demographer. What I try to do is bringing all the insights that you people in the field of education have with individual learnings, the methods or the individual learning outcomes, and try to bring it together what it means at the population level. Because demography is the science of changing size and structures of human populations. It's from the word demos, which is increase the The population, you all know the notion of democracy, which is the governance by the population. In demography, we do the scientific study of the changing distributions. And we do this all over the world. And since you mentioned also the demographic trends in terms of population growth, the main action these days really is in the African continent. As you know, there the mean number of children, depending on country, is still between 4 and 6 children. It's a very young population as a consequence. And of course, it has the highest challenges in terms of development in general, but in particular with respect to education. And here you have sort of a vicious circle because we know for sure that it is education, basic education, particularly of women, female education, is the key to bringing down these very high birth rates to lower numbers that people actually would prefer also. But with so many children, it's an uphill battle to increase school enrollment rates. There are major efforts being made, but if there are more and more children entering the school ages, it is really a major challenge. And there you have sort of this spiral. If girls don't get any education, they will continue to have a large number of children, which will enhance population growth further and make it difficult. So this is really why, in many respects, and also in the consequence with respect to poverty and vulnerability to environmental change that we'll discuss later, we really, the main focus these days should be on Africa, and that's also why my Yidan Prize project will focus on human capital, sort of building the knowledge base in collaboration with the University of Cape Town, with a focus on Africa. But the challenges are, of course, all over the world, and we also see this problem in the context of industrialized countries that are aging. Just very recently, a paper has come out by a former Yidan Prize winner in research, Eric Hanushek, who shows the paper has the subtitle, Skills, Use Them or Lose Them. It's really a very, and he shows this for German data, but it's valid in many other countries. As we get older, of course, the assumption is we lose some of our skills, but he could show if you have a white-collar job, if you start with a higher education at the beginning, you actually likely to improve your skills over your life course, and the decline only sets in at very high age. Whereas people who start with a lower level and then have a job where they don't use their skills, they lose it quite quickly. And the same is, we show this for African countries as well, that there is really a growing global gap in inequality in skills. And that is of major concern, particularly if we have these challenges we just discussed of artificial intelligence. How will people who are not even able to, for basic literacy and numeracy, to take advantage of this? It is an empowering effect of education that we also need to take into consideration as a human right and a way for everybody on this planet to have a fulfilling life. Thank you.
It's amazing. Thank you so much, Wolfgang. And I would like to turn my next question to Kwame and connect what Wolfgang has just been talking about the demographic trends to some of the development goals that we have been working for the last several decades. So as we all know, education has been a priority in global development frameworks, but starting from Millennium Development Goals and now with Sustainable Development Goals, we also realize that we are failing consistently to meet these goals, right? By now, we know that in 2030, we will not meet the SDGs, including SDG 4 for education. And part of the problem, I would argue, is that it's the development of foreign aid architectures that we have set up that is based on already from the very basis on very deep hierarchies between the North and the South, between the East and the West. And Kwame's work is instrumental and groundbreaking in trying to push the limits of the traditional foreign aid architecture by introducing the notion of inclusive development. And I wanted to ask if you could maybe tell us a little bit more about this, what this change of global development architectures that you propose means, what implication does it have for education and for education response to these global challenges that we face?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. To contribute to this discussion. Maybe before I answer the question, to give you a bit of context for my background, I've spent nearly 30 years working in development and about 20 years from the UK working at the University of Sussex, where a lot of the work that I did in development in terms of education and how to improve the lives of children in Africa has been based on interventions and programs that were often constructed and designed from a global north perspective to address the needs of children in the global south, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. And I got to the point where, from the research that we've done, but also looking around that, a lot of the interventions, a lot of the ideas that we've been propagating to improve the lives of children in Africa, actually we've known from the time of EFA, from MDGs to the SDGs, that Africa is consistently and persistently portrayed as lagging behind. And I got a bit disillusioned with the fact that the prescriptions and the modalities that we are prescribing actually are not addressing the fundamental needs of African education. So when I had the opportunity to move from the University of Sussex to the Open University, one of the things that I thought we could do is to look at development very differently. Look at it differently in the sense that we truly, when we talk about inclusive development, we are actually respecting the views and values of the societies in which we work. So for example, a lot of children in African schools and systems are constructed in deficit. You go into an African classroom and the research that we do often constructs these children in deficit. And I think what we do miss in that is that we do not bring into other dimensions of their being in terms of their fonts of knowledge to understand where they're coming from. There's a lot of projection of African children, African teachers who are disempowered, who need to be given capacity, who need to be resourced, without recognizing that a lot of these have resources and capacities that they bring. So we're doing development to these people. And my concern has been that we are going to hit 2030, and actually we were not going to meet the targets we set of ourselves. And so what's the solution? And doing more of the same things I don't think would help the continent. So one of the things that we've been doing when it comes to inclusive development is actually to begin to ask ourselves, how do we treat our partners in understanding the problems of development? So in the Open University, one of the things we did was we're not going to create these hierarchies about the global south and global north. Often when you talk about global development, people tend to think about the global south. But the issues of poverty, deprivation, social deprivation, it runs not just, it's not a global south problem, it's also a global north problem. And actually the power that we can harness when we begin to look at these same problems from the north and the south really provides us with insights into how we can make life better, not only for children in the south, but also for children in the north. So when we talk about inclusive development, we are actually talking about being much more respectful of other cultures and what they bring to the development table. And being humble about what we know. A lot of the teams that I take from Sussex and the Open University to Africa, many of them are not even aware of some of the challenges that they have in their own system, and yet are very eager and very keen to prescribe solutions to the South. And I think it's that kind of humility, that kind of respect that we need to give to cultures. That is what we mean by inclusive development, in the sense that we take very, very seriously what communities, what teachers, what children actually bring, that we listen to them and take their contributions very seriously, rather than assume that we understand what their problems are and how we can address them. So this is what we've been trying to foster in terms of inclusive development.
This is really inspiring, Kwame, and we would love to hear more about it throughout the conversation as well. But I would like to now turn to Rukmini, who works in a very similar, I think, spirit. And her work with Pratham shows the power of community-driven models by literally putting the power of education and the power of measurements in the hands of communities. And Rukmini, for you, of course, we want to hear more about how you organize this amazing work from the grassroots, but also I want to ask you a question. What lessons can the global education community learn from grassroots-led interventions to create scalable and context-specific solutions. So this is inspired by Kwame. I want to turn the question around and ask, what can the North learn from the South?
So first of all, Iveta, thank you so much for the introduction. I also feel intelligence in my hand. I also want to thank the Yidan Foundation for many things, but to be in universities like this, people like us don't get a chance to go to universities, certainly not the top universities, and hear top people. And Iveta had, sent us some questions, and I had some answers in my mind. But after listening to Professor Maynard, I have to rethink everything, right? But in any case, I also love being with men in black. I want to give 3 examples, and maybe at 3 different points in our life of Pratham. The first was almost 25 years ago when we were as a country and maybe as a globe as well, really concerned with getting children into school. And we could see, whether we were at a local level or at a higher level, that the push towards getting children into school was quite strong. And it was quite concerted. Governments were doing it, parents were thinking about it, everybody was kind of united in that goal. And we could see progress. And at the same time, we began to notice a little bit of an underside of that everyone was going to school, but both parents and teachers felt a little bit like the promise or the potential was not coming through, that you weren't getting what you wanted. And that led us to really start exploring what is not happening in school that everybody expects. And it took us a little while to kind of boil that down to, basic learning. And what about basic learning? Basic reading, basic math. If you don't get those in time, then you can't move ahead. But during this process, we realized that really, I saw today a lot of slides on problem solving. But I think problem understanding is probably part of the journey. And so what we used to do is to really do very simple community level, we used to call them village report cards. That if we go into a village or anybody is in a village, how do you characterize in very simple ways, are all children in school? Can they do some basic reading? Can they do some basic math? And people would get involved. We would go sort of habitation by habitation. It was so simple that in a little while, people of that habitation would say, got it, let us do it. And that would lead to a lot of discussions. And I think that it was sort of like the problem about not being in school was very visible, but the problem of not learning was quite invisible. And you just felt it, but you couldn't put your hand to it. And so these village report card exercises really were very useful in sort of making the problem visible, getting conversations around it, and then many people thinking about the solution. To me, at least, I don't have much experience outside India, but I think the universal enrollment levels were reached by everybody understanding the problem and kind of pushing towards the same goal. And we felt at the time that learning probably needs that as well. So these little village report cards we have many villages, so over time accumulated. And at some point we decided to do a national exercise, but do it with the same spirit that in every district in India, a local organization would come together to do this. But we could put together all these little pieces into one big state or national level report. We started in 2005, not 15, as you said. And I think over this period of the last 20 years, this idea that children should go to school and also learn and then slowly learn well has caught. But it started from a very, every person's understanding of what this problem is. If I just fast forward to COVID, which I think was a huge learning experience for everyone, everywhere, a very small part of that was all our work was face-to-face. We deal with children at the community level and in school, face-to-face. We had no experience of not being in front of kids. And so you had to devise almost overnight. One was everyone was concerned about the children who you couldn't meet. And I think that concern and that connection drives a lot of the next stages. So I don't know where it fits in about being human, but I think just wanting and enjoying each other's company. I mean, maybe artificial intelligence will help with that, but right now it still feels like, especially people who work with kids, you want that. During COVID, often teachers would say, if you ask them, what do you miss? They would miss the chaos of the school and the noises of assembly. Nobody said, I miss teaching in that way, but you miss the company. No, I mean, I think you miss the company of each other. So during that time, we set up, being able to talk on the phone. And, WhatsApp was already there, but we noticed that many of our families did not have smartphones at the time. And so we went back to SMS. And we used SMS in a and this is like technology of probably 20 years ago, which served us very well in our context. And then we used the other thing, which was this connection to children. So every one of our teams, we have quite a large team, but we were often making almost in a month 300,000 phone calls to connect to different families in different villages to actually just have a conversation. That did two things. One is it reconnected. Even if you were not face-to-face, people believed you could connect. And the second was it changed our content of what we were sending tremendously. So we would send little activities for parents to do with their children. And when you asked people, they would say, yesterday's was useless. Send a better one. Okay. So I think that this listening close to the ground, connecting constantly, improved our own functioning and hopefully improved the connections. The last one, and I don't want to take too much time, is very recent, because I don't know about others, but we are bombarded with products. Use my product. It has saved, children's mathematical learning in, somewhere, Brussels. Use my, this thing, it will improve. And so we were always at the receiving end of technology products. So at some point we decided that, and I think now I know from professors' slides, I think what we did is we took agency and said, we need to, again, articulate the problem. I can't have somebody sitting far away solve and imagine my problem and solve it for me. So the teaching at the right level approach that we use, which is quite effective, but we said, let's lay it out again. And for every step, what is it that we wished we could do? Whether AI or BI or CI solves it, that will come. But let us at least first say, what do we want next? And that has been a very useful exercise for us. We are right in the early stages. We've just finished what we call a boot camp with 500 children. But every day we will work with the children and spend the afternoon saying, what is it that worked well or not well? And right now there's not that much technology in it. We do have a little bit. And I think that has taught us that if we can articulate and clearly state our problem, many more people can help us. But there's a language difference between people who are working with kids and on the ground and people who are developing technologies. So if you don't come together and work together, the solutions will not come. So over and over again, I feel, frankly, that there is no option but to have your feet on the ground and your ears to the ground and your eyes wide open, because that is from where the understanding and the solutions will come. And if we have this in our DNA, as the world changes, we just keep doing this over and over again to come up with the new problem and the new solution. May sound simplistic, but I feel that's the way to go.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much, Rukmini. And I love how this panel zooms in and out, and maybe it feels dizzying, but I think that's exactly what we need to do. Get close to the ground and up and be in between all the time, right? To really not lose sight of what is happening and where we are heading. So we will move to our next question, and we will focus on global futures and the role of education. And you cannot talk about global futures without thinking about planetary sustainability, climate crisis, which is unraveling just in front of our eyes with not enough action at the policy level. And I will direct my first question to Wolfgang. So research suggests that higher levels of education correlate with greater climate resilience in communities. But at the same time, there is also evidence that higher education completion rates correlate with higher ecological footprint as well. So for example, countries with higher rates of education and higher academic achievement actually have more detrimental impacts on the climate crisis at the same time. So it's a little bit of a dilemma. So I wanted to ask you, what role does education play in fostering sustainability or unsustainability, and how can education system prepare for the climate crisis and help us face the uncertainty related to the ecological breakdowns that we are experiencing?
Well, thank you very much. This is indeed a very important question. And so we have to move from the ground. I subscribe to everything you said, but we also need to complement this with sort of the bigger macro level picture. And I mean, maybe it's worthwhile stepping back and say, like, what does education do to people with respect to climate change? And with respect to anything else, like our income or our health and so on, education empowers people to better achieve what they want to achieve. It gives them more means, and it gives them more determination, more skills, abstraction skills, foresee the future, understand the information. Now, this has different effects, whether we talk about climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. So this is a basic difference. So mitigation means reducing the greenhouse gas emission to avoid as much as possible the already ongoing climate change to get worse. And the adaptation is ways to deal with already unavoidable climate change. Let's start with the adaptation, because there is no doubt that more educated individuals, better educated and better prepared communities, states with a more developed public health system, and they are more resilient. They will be able to better cope with already unavoidable climate change. And there the tragedy is that in some of the countries that the forecasts show that will be most affected by climate change, be it sea level rise or more frequent and first tropical storms coming in, and so on, they are the least prepared in many respects. They have low levels of education, low levels of public health and social organization, and they also have not contributed themselves to causing this climate change. But there is no doubt that adaptation is really enhanced by education. It's more complicated, as you mentioned, on the mitigation side. Because, particularly in the rich countries, education also empowers us to do things we want to have. And of course, everybody typically wants to have better income. So if we have better education, we have better jobs, we have higher income. And the problem is that higher income is very, very closely linked with higher consumption and higher energy consumption. But we have to understand the problem does not start with the education. The problem is in income and associated consumption. We can think of, I mean, as I said, the education has many beneficial effects. It's also better health consequences. There are better participation in society and so on. So if we don't like the higher consumption, we can simply tax away, for instance, the additional income. Then we would only have the benefits of education, and that would not be reflected in a higher consumption. But of course, governments and populations are not so happy about increasing the tax rates. But I mean, it's not the fault of education. It's sort of linked directly to the income. And we can also look statistically, if we control for income, like we look at people in the same income group, some of them are better educated, others less. So we find that after controlling for income, the better educated tend to be more flexible in their mind in changing behavior, using public transportation, using green technology or other behaviors that focus on reducing, on mitigating climate change. So I don't think education is the problem. The problem is the income and the high level of consumption, where technology is partly a solution and behavioral change is the other solution.
Thank you so much. And I'll turn my next question to Rukmini, but I wanted to just take a short minute to maybe also respond and connect. One of the Learning Futures collaboratives here at Teachers College is on education for planetary sustainability. And so we have been working also in the space looking at kind of what type of education, content-wise, value-based-wise, do we need for being able to move towards more sustainable planetary futures. And we have been discussing this idea that currently the mainstream education models very often really promote the values of individualism, hierarchies, separation between people and nature and more, and competition and consumerism, right? This is at the core of mainstream education systems in many, many countries. And I wanted to actually turn to Rukmini right now, because you, in addition to doing this grassroots organizing and grassroots convening of educators, you also are beginning to redefine what learning means. And I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more about about the learning that connects with what you call my world, the immediate environment of a child, the water, the sky, the home, the community, emphasizing intergenerational learning. So how can we reimagine what success means in education to reflect these real world foundational capacities for life, not just learning outcomes, but also as an ability to connect with and shape our very immediate world?
So, we work a lot on very basic building foundations for young children, for children in primary school. And we see that the context in which we are working has a lot of preoccupation with the way the education system is structured today. So while the foundational learning, being very important, has been able to get into a high priority nationally, I think things above foundational learning is still kind of open. So a couple of years ago, we were really looking to understand the age group 14 to 18. And we did a kind of a survey, you can say, where we asked all kinds of people, what should a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old Indian child be able to do? We don't do PISA. India has participated in PISA only once. But what is it that at the end of elementary school, we want the child to be like? And overwhelmingly, we got two types of answers. This was all from, grandparents, village council members, teachers, older kids, and so on. Two answers were, you must have good marks, because everything in education in India is linked to passing certain exams with high excellence marks. That's the only thing that opens doors. And the second one was, be a good human being. Now, both of those are, I'm sure, part of what we want to do, but it was not very specific. And so we've started thinking about this sort of what I feel is a very neglected space, at least in my country, which is middle school. If I think about at least by 10, you've got your basic foundational building blocks of being able to read, talk, understand, and so on. And then I have high school, which is very, very tightly constrained by examinations. Then I have only 3 or 4 years in the middle to really play with why are we learning, what are we learning, and how will it change? And we, in addition to being obsessed with examination performance, we also have very tight connection to our textbook, because you're tested on what's in the textbook, and therefore, you make sure that you understand your textbook well. 250 million children and only one kind of textbooks, and very, very many different terrains in which our children live. So we've started this thing which we are calling Our World, in which we feel that kids need to know more than is in textbook. Climate change may be a very big cosmic thing, but what is it in your immediate environment? What was water like in your village when your grandfather was in school? What was the snacks that your mom ate in the evening? Little things like this which can get you a sense of some change over time and some reality today. So that's one. The second one is, why does everything have to be done alone? Somehow education and individual excellence is a very individual activity. But more or less outside of the examinations, everything you do is with people. But we don't develop that habit in India, at least in school. It's only when you go to do an MBA that you do a group project. You don't do a group project when you're in 6th grade. So how do you get this group thing? How do you get connection to your immediate environment? And how do you learn to talk about it as well? Because we are very used to pen and paper assessments, not about how do I communicate. So we've been having a lot of very, very interesting and fun exercises with these very simple themes and very simple hands-on group projects. And one of the things we see, Kwame, is as soon as we put kids into a group or they choose their own group, there are all sorts of skills that come out. And in many of our community-based projects, the kids who are doing really well are not the kids who have the best reading or the math. And the respect that those kids are getting, because somebody needs to go out and talk to the village headman and come back, is, I think, helping to kind of equalize the respect and, the mutual kind of understanding within the group. So I feel that that's one way to link between what, Wolfgang is talking about and what we can do on the ground. I just want to leave you with this thought. I live in the world's most polluted city, or certainly one of the in top range. Kids in that city are seeing on a daily basis that the problem is not getting solved. They're seeing that their adults are not being able to cope. They have no hand, as most citizens, in how shall we improve this situation. I feel this is not a healthy place. Not that kids in the city can solve a problem, but you've got to start engaging. Otherwise, the solutions will not come if you wait for a policy decision only to solve your problem. So I think when we live in very tough situations in different places, we've got to think about some agency of being able to engage and do a little bit of whatever it is that we can do around, and perhaps that can accumulate at some stage to making some really big difference on some of our key issues.
Thank you. I'll move on to Kwame now with probably the most difficult question. I saved it for you because I, for some reason, see you as in this middle space between the very grassroots and the global policy and trends. You are right in the middle trying to figure out how do we create policies and practices in ways that are context specific but speak to the larger issues as well. So you've worked extensively on bridging this policy and practice divide especially in resource limited contexts. So what, from your perspective, are key barriers to scaling more sustainable education reforms, or reforms that are also lead us to more planetary sustainability, and how policies can be designed to remain flexible and inclusive for future generations?
Okay, thank you very much. One of the experiences I've been having in the last couple of years, particularly in the last year and a half, is working very closely with ministries, particularly the Ministry of Education in Ghana. And one of the things I've learned over the years, not only in the Ghanaian context, is how much as researchers, as practitioners, we often don't understand the political economic context of the policymaker. And I've spent a lot of my years trying to develop evidence, to share evidence, and to inform the policymaking process. And increasingly, I've become aware of the fact that the world of the policymaker and how you translate evidence into policy is much more complex than we often think of. It is not simply a brilliant idea or a brilliant piece of research or a robust piece of research that really gets policymakers to act. And I think one of the things that I'm beginning to realize is that at the global level, where we have global policies, often we don't understand what it means for a policymaker to respond to that policy. In the first place, often the research and the policy advice we give is not often coming with the cost implications. We don't do enough to really say, how much does it actually cost to implement this particular policy? And if you go into many ministries in Africa, there are many interventions. People are coming with brilliant ideas about how you can improve children's learning. But actually, if you ask them, as a ministry that is budget constrained, that has limited resources, spends about 70 to 80% of their resources on compensation, paying teachers, a brilliant idea is not necessarily a good idea if it's not affordable. And I think this is one thing we are missing for those of us in the research and working in research, that we don't think very much about what the policymaker has to do to respond to that, but also the constituencies that it has to respond to. So we haven't done enough to understand their world, that when you are talking about policy, you are not simply talking about good ideas, you're not simply talking about good evidence, you're talking about a whole lot of other issues that has implications for behavior change. So what is it that would make a policymaker change their mind? Not necessarily the evidence, but how can evidence be part of that process of really influencing how they think? And I don't think we think enough of that. And if I can add just a little bit of recent examples, in Ethiopia, where we did some work about 12 years ago, and when we presented the evidence to the Ministry of Education 12 years ago, the first thing they did was to reject the evidence, and the fact that because they felt that we were able to get children to read and write in 10 months when they had not succeeded in doing that in 3 years. So there was a real suspicion about the research, which was healthy, I thought. It's always good to question whether this really makes sense. But the thing they did next was what really I felt was very useful. They said, well, we need to commission another research. We need to find out a bit more about whether this is true. So they commissioned another research within another group of people who did this research and came to a similar conclusion. It was only when they had come to that conclusion that they decided they wanted to do something about it. But they said, we cannot do it with the resources we have. Now, I remember saying, well, it doesn't matter. What is it that you can do with what you have? And I think we have been guilty of trying to throw money at all the problems of education. A lot of what they had to do did not require a lot of money. So we started by asking them, what is it that you can do that does not require a lot of money? And they came out brilliant ideas. What is it that you can do that requires a little bit more money? And that's where we focused on. So before the whole issue about funding comes in and how you inform policy, I think we need to start asking different questions, understanding the world of the policymaker, and understanding that our brilliant ideas, once we have to think about how we scale it up, what does it cost? What would make a decision maker change their mind or not? That evidence is not necessarily the fact that you have good evidence that people will respond. Actually, in Ethiopia, one of the reasons why they responded was that we had somebody who was part of the in the region who saw the work we had done, who had been moved into the ministry. So he was a champion in the ministry. And what he did was to take the ministry people to go and see the schools. The evidence came from actually visibility, seeing the schools, not from the reports that he had written. And they just spent a little time there and they thought, well, this is something we need to do. So I think this has taught me a lot about how we think about how we translate evidence into policy, but also understanding the world of the policymaker and how we should really take more time to understand that world. And if we want to get them to act on the things that we think are beneficial for education. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame. And I wanted to say this panel also reminds me why it is so critical to bring people from different, not only disciplinary contexts, from demography to policy to community-led education, but also so across different levels, but also different disciplines, different geographic contexts. How much richness is there when we come together to ask the different questions as you suggest, right? And to try to approach the problems that we have been solving for so long unsuccessfully. So I definitely see some hope in coming together of like-minded people from different backgrounds and contexts and disciplines in moving this discussion further. One maybe constituencies that we do not have with us today on the stage are the young children themselves who are benefiting from education. But I wanted to really briefly maybe make a plug for one of the projects that we have done at Arizona State University, where we crowdsourced youth visions of education futures in the context of the climate crisis. And we have some of the artworks that we would love to share with all of you that is in the back of the room, and it's small decks of cards called Turn It Around. But the idea with this project was to ask young people to share with us what are their visions of education futures in an art form and link it with policymakers. To be able to move the policymakers on an affective level, because often we do have information and data at our fingertips, but still the right decisions are not made. But with people like you and in conversation with young people, I hope that we can move towards a more sustainable and more equitable future for the planet and for the people. But on this note, it's not the end of our panel. We actually would like now to turn the some of the questions to the audience and spend the next 15 minutes talking about maybe what is one key insight that shifted your thinking about education and planetary sustainability after this discussion this morning. Maybe what is one action or more than one that you can take in your work in your research or in advocacy to contribute to more sustainable and equitable education futures. And if you had a chance to ask any of the panelists one question, what would it be? We will come together after 15 minutes for closing remarks and maybe to take 1 or 2 questions from the audience as well. But on this note, for now, thank you so much for the beginning of the conversation.
Should we also have a little discussion round here?
Yeah. Should we? Or would you like, we decided we were not going to go to the tables.
Fine, thank you.
Fine, thank you so much.
Oh, my mouth got so dry.
Yeah.
So we decided we were not going to go to the tables,
Probably
right?
not, yeah.
So
Otherwise,
that
we
we-
wanted just us to talk to.
Yeah, they have
Intrigued by what you said about
after that, yeah.
the environment and
Yeah.
sustainability. Because some of the research we've been doing suggests that the people who are the communities that are most affected by it, actually
Guy came by and he
Actually, maybe the way to get your attention is we do have an opportunity to ask 1 or 2 questions from our panelists. And if you could maybe raise your hand, we'll take 2 questions and then we have the panelists respond. So we have Teresa and anybody else afterwards, please get ready.
My name is Maria Teresa Tato. I am a professor at the college and a happy and, oops. Hello. Hello, I'm Teresa Tato, and I am a very happy colleague of Iveta's and a professor in the college. And I want to thank you for your wonderful presentations. They are also relevant. I have a question, which is, what about the teachers? I didn't hear teachers mentioned in any of the commentaries, and so they are so essential, you know, to understand what role they play in each one of your visions.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Anybody else? Any other comment?
Lasse Leponiemi from the 100 Foundation. Building based on what was discussed already earlier today and what was shared in the morning, I think the another aspect to look at is that what do we mean when we are talking about education for human flourishing? So what does it mean to be human, and what kind of skills and competencies we need in a future? And when that's being said, we have a couple of challenges. How do we keep our education systems and our schools relevant for the future? At times, our students do not feel so. Then secondly, when we are seeing that AI-driven tools, the general knowledge and insights that we are able to have an access for, are making the role of academic institutions different, how we keep our academic institutions still relevant and exciting and interesting for our students to have their careers in. So a couple of things for you to ponder about.
All right, and we'll take one last question.
The piece from the morning, which is about AI. The thing about AI is it's going to be not environmentally friendly with all these data centers and water and all of that. And there's a huge opportunity with how technology is evolving. On the other hand, we are just, sucking the air out of our planet. So how do you balance this as you think about human potential and sustainability?
Brilliant question. And I'm glad I don't have to answer all of them. So who would like to start?
Or maybe we can in the same order. I mean, these are very challenging questions indeed. The one of the teachers I leave to you because I know very little about teachers. Sort of my main focus in the context of global development really is on basic skills, basic literacy and numeracy skills. This is not only an issue in developing countries, it is also a European and an American issue, and the PISA studies show that even in the rich countries, typically between 20 and 25% of the 15-year-olds cannot read a simple sentence with understanding. How can people who cannot understand a simple sentence be able to cope with AI in a meaningful way? I mean, this is one of the challenges. The whole AI thing is not becoming something benefiting only the elites who can deal and benefit from it, and marginalize even more those who don't have enough skills. So I think that is one of the big challenges.
And please choose any question you want to answer.
Maybe I'll take the teacher question. Again, the reference is really to the context that I know. One of the biggest challenges of teaching and learning is the variance in the classroom, in the composition of the children I have. And so if I look at what the system requires a teacher to do in sort of centralized systems, and what is the reality of the classroom, these are quite far apart. So I have, for example, if you look at the data from India, and you look at, say, 3rd grade, there's only about 20 to 30% kids who are at grade level in 3rd grade. But our teaching is all done based on age, grade, curricular expectations. And this is, I think, a big tension. One of the ways in which evidence helps to illustrate the problem is there was a randomized control trial done some time ago, which looked at using, methods that were very child-friendly by teachers to teach their regular curriculum for the whole year, and then in the summer, move away from the curriculum and start with the children at the level that they were. The gains that were made in that 1 month in the summer was far higher than what the teacher worked on the whole year. So I think at least for our teachers, the real tension is if you're working hard, but not seeing the results, and that's because of the structural imposition of a curriculum on you, you're somehow losing the real, essence of what the teaching learning process should be. But we have centralized systems. So one of the ways to deal with it is to introduce time and space for the building of these foundational skills, because the building of the foundational skills, regardless of your age, almost even all the way up to elementary school end, is that it's not just about reading and math and understanding. It's about the self-confidence of a child in herself and the confidence of the teacher that she's making a difference in the child's life. So I think this is not an innovative idea, but the teaching learning to matter has to be really meaningful for both parties and relevant for that condition. And I wish we could have that flexibility for teachers and children to just progress together in the basic ways that will really lead to a much bigger impact later.
So I was going to also add something about the teachers, because that's also my background, and but also pose a very question that I've been grappling with, and perhaps relates to what we heard earlier this morning about AI and technology. Is that I think the teacher professional identity and what teachers do is going to fundamentally change in ways which I don't think we have started grappling with. And what does the teacher do? Who is a teacher? And how does the teacher engage within this environment where knowledge, information, is not something traditionally where we've had the teacher as the mediator of that knowledge or helping children to understand. A lot of children who are coming into school really are getting exposed to a lot of more through technology, sometimes even far more than the teachers. Okay, so this creates a very different kind of a relationship within the classroom, within the environment. But also, I think students, especially when you move into the higher levels, are having much more to say about what they expect. So if I can use a personal example, when my son during the COVID period, and he said, I found a teacher in Manchester that can help me I can learn much better than what my teacher in the school was teaching me, and then he found different kinds of teachers around, and he was engaging with that. Now, for him to have made that decision, how did he arrive at that decision that he can find a teacher who is giving him much more than other teachers are giving? And therefore, the boundaries of education and schooling had exploded for him. That it's not just the school he was attending, but also what he can find and the decisions that we make. So I think we need to begin to ask that our students are going to ask more questions about why they have this person before me teaching me, and what is it that they're teaching? What is it that I know, and how does it change the relationship between myself and the teacher and the knowledge which I'm supposed? So I think we do need to fundamentally think about how we do teacher education and how teachers are going to respond to this fast-changing world, which would completely would change their own positioning within the school system and within the education system. And I don't think that we have seriously grappled with it. We're still thinking about teacher education in very traditional terms, without thinking about the teacher of the future. Will we have a teacher of the future? Who would this teacher look like? What would they look like? What will they be doing? What resources would they have? And I think these are questions that we need to ask and find answers to.
Thank you so much. I know that we have not answered all of the questions, but I wanted to encourage all of you to find the panelists later, to continue these conversations in the breaks, over dinners, breakfasts, and maybe other panels as well. But I would like to end our panel with 2 more questions, very brief ones. You will only have 1 minute to answer. So if there is one thing that you would like the audience to maybe remember from this conversation this morning, what is it? What is this one key insight about education and planetary futures that you'd like to leave our beautiful audience to think with? And maybe one inspiration from you for the audience as well, which could be maybe a film or a resource or a traditional saying or anything else, anything that you would like to leave us with. 1 minute each.
Okay, maybe I just come back to this short quote by Benjamin Franklin that I started with, that an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest, which is not self-evident these days anymore. What we'll see is really a major effort, not just in this country, but in other countries as well, against science. And a colleague of mine has even called it's a war not against science, it's a war against knowledge. Yeah. But we cannot be against knowledge. Like if we deny climate change, if we deny reality, we'll just hit the wall. The problem is it sometimes takes long until we hit the wall and get a bloody nose or worse. So the people who currently are responsible may not themselves experience this, but future generations then will even harder see the consequences. But we must strengthen knowledge again in the spirit of Benjamin Franklin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Return to the question about inclusiveness. And I think we should really seriously take the different perspectives and views, even if they don't sit with our worldview. Because I think that's one thing we've been missing in our understanding of our development, of our challenges, that we often work in bubbles and that we listen to each other. We read the same things, we hear the same things. My encouragement is that we begin to listen to voices that are not consistent with our experience, understanding. And I think once we begin to do that, we will begin to have a better understanding of the kind of society that we live in and how we can make it better.
Beautiful, thank you.
I'll go with one book and one movie. Just recently finished reading a book by Marianne Wolf, which I'm sure a lot of academics may have read, about the reading brain in a digital age. And I think I could almost hear her all morning adding to the conversation here, that this whole business about helping children read has to be tackled in a new way, given the changes that we see that is happening around us. The second is a movie that was produced perhaps maybe even 15 or 20 years ago called 2 Million Minutes. Some of you may know it. It's 2 million minutes from when you enter high school till when you finish it. And at that time, the filmmakers, whoever they were, picked 3 pairs, a boy and a girl each, a pair in Shanghai, a pair in somewhere in the Midwest in America, and a pair in Bangalore in India, and followed what they did for those 4 years, what their parents said, what their teachers said, what their were expectations, and so on. I think there is a need for a new film like that, because in addition to their own life trajectories, which I think would be quite different, each of these, and depending on where you pick them up from, would be dealing with different aspects of how the world around them is changing, physically and otherwise, as well as in terms of, you know, the technology and the transformations we are seeing. So if there are any film producers in this audience, maybe ASU, Yidan, maybe somebody can get together, because coming from the world of India, where films have a big impact, I think that this is the kind of thing that helps everybody grapple with some of these issues.
This is beautiful. So as you see from this panel, the new learning futures are emerging. And we are so much looking forward to exploring this emergence with all of you this morning and the next day and in the future. So thank you so much. Give a big round of applause to our amazing panelists. Thank you so much.
Let me just thank you again. I feel already so inspired and have so many new ideas. I'm not sure I can take the whole rest of the day. This is just so exciting. A great way to get us started. Thank you so much. So just wanted to remind you of the QR code. You should be able to scan that. There's instructions on the slides. So please start adding comments, questions for our speaker tomorrow. We have another roughly 15-minute break, so I encourage you to get up, move around. We do have another panel before lunch, so please get up, continue the conversation, and we'll call you back in another 15 minutes. So thank you very much.